This week is all about big news because by the end of this week, we're going to be having the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini, and that's going to set us up for the Mercury ingress into Cancer and the Jupiter ingress into Cancer. As well, this week, we finally have Venus moving into Taurus, where we finally have a planet getting some dignity. Jupiter's been in detriment, Saturn's now fallen, Venus has been in detriment. So having a benefic planet actually go into a sign of dignity in its home sign is going to be really good. We have a few other highlights this week, so there's a lot to talk about, and let's just go ahead and get started talking about it. Welcome back to the Astrology Report, this time for June 2nd through June 8th of 2025. My name is Cam White. My job is to let you know what the fuck is going on in the astrology and how to use it to your advantage and not be a victim of it. Anyway, we have a lot of highlights this week. We have the Venus-Jupiter sextile. We have the Mercury-Mars sextile. Venus moves into Taurus. And by the end of the week, we have the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, which is kind of a big deal. And then we'll also have Mercury move into Cancer almost immediately after that. So let's get into it. So I just want to shout out and say thank you to the almost 2,000 of you that have signed up for the 90-day challenge. And if you are interested in what I'm talking about, starting on June 1st, so you're watching this on June 1st, this is the beginning of the 90-day challenge, the new identity challenge with Saturn and Aries. The whole point of this is, Saturn's only going to be in Aries for a little over 90 days. And so during these next 90 days, we're going to get a taste of what 2026, 2027, and a lot of 2028 is going to look like. And the way that I've looked at this is, why not use this as a time? As 90 days is only a quarter. Like, do the hard things, make the changes, especially because Aries rules identity and Saturn is like, again, limitations and restrictions, but also discipline and maturity. Like, how can we re-identify ourselves and really shift the narrative? So if you haven't signed up yet, go ahead and check it out. I've got at this moment that I'm recording this, I got 4 PDFs that I think, I mean, there's literally been 1,000 comments on how good they all are. And if you're interested in doing any sort of personal development, improving yourself, go ahead and check that out. It is absolutely free, by the way. So I'm doing this just really because I'm doing it for myself and I want to bring other people with me and help them go through the same process I'm going through. And speaking of that, I actually wanted to do a little bit of a horoscope for Sunday because the day that you're watching this, which is hopefully Sunday because you subscribed to the channel and you saw the notification, but on Sunday we have the moon in Leo separating from Mars and applying to Venus. This isn't like a specific day I elected for this 90-day challenge thing. I find with electional astrology, it's so much easier when you just stop caring because it's easier. It's so difficult to find the perfect chart all of the time. But I launched this on the new moon in Gemini, and I wanted you guys to get prepared for this whole last week. And so June 1st, this is the day the challenge starts. This is the day to actually get going. And did you write down your goals? Did you take care of everything? And are you going to put down the work that's required for you? But the moon's going to be applying to Venus all day here on Sunday, and then it's going to be sextiling Jupiter before it moves into Virgo. And there's just this inspirational feeling that we get on Sunday, but then later on when the moon goes into Virgo, it's just kind of about doing things in an orderly way. But then we actually start the week here on Monday with the moon in Virgo. Look, the moon's not really making too many aspects to anything on Monday. It's just hanging out in Virgo. And the things that I wrote down were being a little slightly anxious. A lot of it is kind of just chilling and hanging out and being very orderly. The moon is about our body, our emotions, and our day-to-day kind of what we're doing. And with it being in Virgo, where we want to be more meticulous and orderly, maybe you have your 90-day goal and you've got your list of things to do. This is just about following that routine, being in that order, and not stressing out too much about it. But then we get to Tuesday, and on Tuesday, the moon in Virgo is going to make a square to Mercury, and then it will conjoin the South Node a little bit later on in the evening. So the big thing with this is, I'll just kind of say what I wrote down first, and that's gossip over fact. The thing is, the South Node is in Virgo right now, and this is what I find really interesting about, especially doing this whole 90-day plan thing. And I wrote about it in the PDF file about because I went over what June and July and August are going to look like. And, later on in June, we'll have Mars move into Virgo, and in July, it'll conjoin the South Node. And I've been really thinking about that because Mars South Node conjunctions are one of my favorite transits. They're just great, transits just to get rid of shit and throw things out. But I bring this up because the South Node, it takes away and it's draining and exhausting. And yeah, I could bring up things from the past, but it's in Virgo. And one of the things I wrote about was how back when the node shifted in January, you saw Meta and Mark Zuckerberg talk about they're not doing any fact checking anymore. And that was something I kind of talked about in 2024 about this transit. And there's something about the South Node in Virgo is you can't worry about the order and the routine and the process. The North Node's in Pisces, you have to just kind of, the difference between Pisces and Virgo is I cited my sources, I went through the text and all this, and Pisces is the source was revealed to me in a dream. And I bring this up because when we go through this process of like this 90 days, it's not about, oh, like, let me cross all my T's and dot all my I's. And I wrote down a plan to quit. Like, if you want an out, like, I really poured my heart into the quitting PDF file, because there's no quitting. Like, and it's not that like, oh, there's no quitting. It's like, this is what your soul wants. Like, you can't focus on like, oh, I got to do this and I got to do this task and write this down and write this down. It's deeper than that. It's richer than that. And so when the moon's in Virgo, making that square to Mercury and conjoining the South Node, I said gossip over fact, because with everything in Gemini right now, it's just about word on the town. And it reminds me of like how the stock market used to crash back in the day, how it would literally just crash because of rumors rather than any sort of factual thing. And so when the moon squares Mercury, there's like this, wanting to be orderly and precise on Tuesday. But as it squares Mercury, there's just information or some sort of communication that might, jar your facts, that might sort of make it uncomfortable. Like, well, that's not what the directions say, and that's not what the order says. And sometimes you can't listen to it, because when the moon conjoins the South Node, you have to let go of having to know things. Like, just something as I've gotten older is sometimes you just don't get closure. Sometimes you just can't know things until you know them, right? I think that's a part of just getting older and growing up. And I think as the moon conjoins the South Node, there has to be this, you can't always just follow the order and the routine and the precision of things. And while that will really help you on Monday, I think by Tuesday, you might have to readjust and rethink exactly how you're going about things, because you have to let go of knowing exactly what to do. No one's going to hold your hand and teach you, hey, this is what you have to do. You have to find it within yourself to figure out what is right for you, what is the true thing for you to do, and not necessarily just by going off of a spreadsheet of these are the facts. Then we get to Wednesday, and on Wednesday, the moon will first make a square to Jupiter. It's then going to ingress into Libra, go opposite Saturn, go opposite Neptune, and then we get our first highlight of the week, which is the Venus-Jupiter sextile. So as the moon's in Virgo making that square to Jupiter, I've been saying the same thing kind of for like about a year now, which is just information overwhelm. I think with Jupiter and Gemini, it's been hard I can't even watch YouTube anymore or like listen to anything. Like, it's just too much and it's all just junk anyway. But I think about how Jupiter is about like abundance and faith. And again, it can't work in the sign of Gemini. Like, faith requires, a lack of, logic and fact. It requires, something deeper, something richer, something higher. It requires like salvation. It requires, sacrifice almost in a lot of ways, like sacrificing the need to understand and know. And I think as the moon's in Virgo squaring Jupiter, there's like almost this resistance to like, but I want to know. And maybe there's just information that I'm lacking and maybe I just don't understand it enough. And I think you might get a little bit overwhelmed on Wednesday for a moment. But then the moon moves into Libra, where it's going to go opposite Saturn and then go opposite Neptune. And the thing I wrote down was like, peace is met with resistance. The moon being in Libra wants to be more, again, balanced, fair, orderly, more relationship oriented, but it immediately goes opposite Saturn. I have the moon in Libra opposite Saturn and Aries in my birth chart. This is my fucking life. So I'm very, very familiar with this energy. And I think about how, there is no peace without war, which is really interesting just to kind of, think about. Like, that's what the astrology dynamic literally shows. And you can see that that's true throughout history. And I think as the moon's in Libra, where we want that peace and we want that balance, the opposition is technically the most negative transit. And I know everyone out there being like, oh my God, Cameron, you're so negative. Heaven forbid we talk about reality where things may not always be comfortable. But Saturn is, again, discipline, maturity, barriers, walls. It's fallen in Aries. It will be more difficult to have that sort of that discipline. It will require more from you. You will not have the resources or the time that you think, keyword, that you think that you need. And I think as the moon's in Libra opposite Saturn and Aries is that you're not going to get the balance that you want, at least right here. Something that I've been playing with mentally that I think makes more sense is, you listen to, all the personal development people, and there's a whole group of people that are like, oh, you need to find balance in life. And there's other group of people that are like, there is no balance. And I think balance, and I have my moon in the third decan of Libra, which is about oscillation. And I think a lot about oscillation, not necessarily as like balance as in like, oh, it needs to be 50-50. But when you spin really fast and you think about a top, or like if you're a Gen Z, a Beyblade, the spinning, the constant movement and the motion makes it wobble, but it's balanced. And so that's something I want you to kind of think about as the moon goes into Libra and opposite Saturn is like, don't think of balance as in everything is 50-50. Everything has, the equal amount of time, equal amount of energy. But understanding that, one of the things I wrote in the quitting PDF was the scales. Like sometimes balance looks like this. Sometimes balance looks like this. Other things weigh heavier than other things. And I think when the moon goes into Libra and goes opposite Saturn, we're going to really understand that like balance isn't just about 50-50. Balance is about what is fair or what is necessary. As the moon goes opposite Saturn, we have that resistance. Jesus fucking Christ, enough with the emails. As we have that balance, or I should say, as we kind of face that resistance of like, hey, I need to do this, even though I'm striving for the balance. The issue is the moon then goes opposite Neptune, where I think the hard part with Saturn and Neptune in Aries is, okay, Neptune's in Aries, visualization, fantasy, illusion, mysticism around our actions, right? But Saturn being there is like, it's harder than we think. And then as we hit Saturn first, where it's like, oh, wow, this is hard. It hits Neptune where it's like, I'm not really sure what to do. And I think there'll be kind of this confusion of like, okay, well, what does balance look like? Or what does action look like? Or what is that just, again, in general look like? And I think that's just going to be something that we'll have to suss out over time. Like you're not going to have it figured out on Wednesday. You may not have it figured out next year or the year after that. It's going to take time for all of these things. And that's the beauty of astrology is this is the new dynamic that we're facing for the next little while. And we are blessed with an opportunity to discover what that part of our life and our journey looks like. But our highlight on Wednesday is the Venus-Jupiter sextile. I really like this because the thing I wrote down was like hot girl shit and doing bad things. It's funny that both of the benefic planets are in detriment, but they're like sextiling each other where it's like, kind of Dumb and Dumber almost in a way. But Venus in Aries is pleasure and fun. It's bad. We're doing like the things that we're finding fun and joy in are unorthodox. We're struggling with them almost in a way. Jupiter is about hope and faith, and it's also kind of down. And I feel like this is almost a coping mechanism of, well, I need some sort of a pleasure. I need some sort of a reward system, right? Because pain and pleasure are two motivating, factors in life. And I think there's a pleasure aspect that you're trying to get out of here. And it may look like doing something a little hostile or, against the grain. And it might be good, right? I just think this is like, there's something good here. There's something being hot girl. And the reason I wrote that down is there's a difference between being like polished and well kept versus being kind of like, this is not the appropriate word to use, but it's the only thing I could think of off the top of my head. But like, there's two hot girls, right? There's being very like, polished, upkept, all that. And then there's kind of being like slutty, trashy, if that makes sense. And not like trashy in like a bad way, but kind of like risque or somewhat, dangerous almost looking. And that's kind of the vibe on Wednesday is, you know what? I feel like being a little bit edgy of challenging the status quo over what is fun or what is pleasurable for me or for you, I should say. And Jupiter and Gemini is just going to be able to like rationalize why you're doing that. Maybe you need that at this moment. Again, it's Venus and Jupiter both in detriment. I don't know how great it will actually be, but it'll be something. And then we get to Wednesday, and we have two highlights on Wednesday while the moon is just hanging out in Libra. And that's going to be the Mercury. Mercury will make a sextile to Mars, and Venus will ingress into Taurus. So the Mercury-Mars sextile is really interesting to me, given Mars is still in Leo. I feel like we'll never get out of this, even though Mars does move into Virgo pretty soon. But anyway, Mars in Leo is things dealing with anger and frustration, and our energy and our drive is fueled by our pride and our ego and our sense of being seen and visible. And we take more actions to be more visible and to be more seen, but then there's also more issues that come with it, right? There's good and bad. And I think as Mercury makes that sextile to Mars, the thing I wrote down was like, have you ever been roasting someone, or like, again, you're with your friends, you're all making fun of each other, and there's times where you'll try to say something clever and quick, but you stutter, and then you just get made fun of for stuttering. And then there's other times where you just say the right thing at the right time, and it totally digs, and everyone laughs. That's the vibe of Thursday. There's something about being sharp and quick that like opens up a sense of like, being seen, being, witnessed almost in a way. It's very like, just saying something or thinking something that allows Mars to do its thing, whether that's having more action or more energy. Maybe you have an internal self-dialogue that allows you to, get more done or feel more confident about the work that you're doing. Or maybe someone says something to you that's very confidence inducing or gives you a lot of pride in what you're doing. So that's great. But let's talk about Venus going into Taurus. Okay, big vibe shift here. The vibe really fucking shifts over the next 2 weeks. Like when we wrap up this video and I start talking about next week, the amount of transits are insane. But it starts with Venus going into Taurus. Venus, again, she's about pleasure and fun. And yeah, during her retrograde phase, she was in Pisces for a minute. But let's consider the fact that she was with Saturn, she was in shadow or retrograde. And then again, also maybe even combust and under the beams. So while Venus was exalted, which was nice, there's also a part of it that was the condition wasn't good. The condition wasn't fun or pleasurable. Venus moving into her home sign is value and fun and pleasure and connection. She has all of the access to the resources that she needs to do that job. And I'm going to tell you right now, we haven't had a lot of astrology with any dignity. Mars was in Cancer for a long time. Sure, Saturn was in Pisces and it was kind of, didn't have much dignity. It didn't have triplicity, domicile, exaltation. I think it was in its terms for a little while. And I don't think it rules the last face of Pisces. So pretty much peregrine. Venus was in detriment. Jupiter's been in detriment. That's incredibly symbolic of there's no resources. If you've felt over the past, you could look at the past 8 or 9 months, but with different circumstances each time of there being no resources, there being no dignity, there being no help, that can really challenge your perceived quality of life. And I think as Venus goes into Taurus, your worst meal is like a third world poor African child dream meal, if that makes sense. And I say that because getting something, anything in its home sign after all of this time, I think is actually going to feel a lot better than we're anticipating. And especially around relationships, especially about around fun and pleasure, feeling more normalized, not on our crash out phase, but much more normalized. And that continues throughout the next little while as Jupiter goes into Cancer too. So this is really exciting. I think something about Wednesday is kind of returning back to normal, right? Have you ever experimented with stuff that you thought you were into or that you thought you liked, and then you're like, I don't know if I really like this, and then you kind of get back to normal. You're like, this is actually what I like. That's what's going on Wednesday. My bad, Thursday. And then we get to Friday. The moon is first going to make a sextile to Mars. Then it's going to trine Mercury. Then the moon will be trining Jupiter for a while before the moon moves into Scorpio and then immediately goes opposite Venus. As the moon is in Libra and it makes that sextile to Mars, again, the thing I wrote down was moving through the crowds and shaking hands. It reminds me of, when I was doing my astrology picnics in Denver, it was so hard to do anything because everyone just wants to talk to me. And that's what I'm there for, right? It is fun, but it is kind of 4 hours of just hey, who are you? Nice to meet you. Oh my God, nice to meet you. And doing all this. And it's very fun. It's very exciting. There's something about the moon in Libra, connecting more with relationships, but it's sextiling Mars in Leo, where it's just kind of it's just fun, I think. It's a little bit brash. It's a little bit bold. It's a little bit, loud, but there's something charming about it, especially after the moon makes that sextile to Mars and then trines Mercury. It's you're feeling confident. Have you ever been in a situation where I'm sure some of you have been to, whether it's an event in your own thing that you do, or even a family get together? If you haven't seen your family in a long time, and if you're anything like me and I'm the black sheep that no one knows what's going on in my life, and I go and see everyone and I talk to everyone, it's just a lot of fun and catching up. That's the vibe on Friday. So there's a lot of fun socializing on Friday. I think as the moon leaves that trine to Mercury, and again, very clear communication, things are just happening. Then the moon trines Jupiter. Very hopeful, but it's still Jupiter in Gemini, where it's a little bit of information overwhelm and a little bit of still coping with if I just have the perfect rational thought process around my life, everything will be better. And it's just, again, it's so funny how we cannot, Jupiter and Gemini has just taught me how fucking real astrology is. It's dude, there's just no getting out of it. It's just a waiting game and figuring out how to not fuck yourself over the most. But as the moon trines Jupiter, it's hopeful, and it is hopeful. And I think that's the good part. That's a lot of Friday. We get to Friday night though, and that's when the moon moves into Scorpio and goes opposite Venus. I think a lot about the Scorpio-Taurus axis a lot, and how like Taurus is, it's funny when like I have a vegan friend of mine who, she's always like, oh my God, meat's mad, blah, blah, blah. And it's just funny how you don't get the Taurus stuff without the Scorpio stuff. So whether it's, like, hey, you want to eat some beef? Yeah, well, you're going to have to kill the cow. Well, if you want, like access to fruit and vegetables, especially at scale, because we have to feed 8 billion people, like you're going to kill other vermins and wildlife, and you're going to have to poison a lot of these things. And yes, I understand people are going to be like, hey, there's, regenerative agriculture. And I understand all that stuff. I'm just using this as like the reality of the world right now is that. And I bring that up because the moon being about our emotions and how we feel, is going to go into its sign of fall. It's going to go into Scorpio, where there's this kind of clutching of pearls and this kind of fear. And it's going to be opposing Venus and Taurus, where Venus is like, hey, I want to have fun. It's kind of like one of those things where, back when everyone was trying to be vegan, like 2010, you watched Forks Over Knives or Cowspiracy, and you're like, like, that's what it takes. Like, that's so gross and so bad. I can't eat this anymore, even though the steak is amazing to taste. And so like the moon and Scorpio going opposite Venus is the emotional, like, I don't want to say damage, but there's this painful feeling that flies and resists any sort of pleasure that can be found from it. And I don't think this is necessarily bad. It just is what it is. And I find, the thing I wrote down for this transit was pain equals pleasure. And you could put that both ways, like pleasure equals pain. I wrote this somewhere on, I think it was like my Jupiter and Cancer email. If you haven't signed up for my newsletter, like you should. But I wrote an email about Jupiter and Cancer and Saturn and Aries and them making a square to one another. And when you think about like sugar, you think about anything pleasurable, drugs or alcohol, it can lead to pain, and it eventually will. And then a lot of pain. So again, think about a workout. That will, and again, even like things like discipline can lead to pleasure at the end of the day. And so I just find this dynamic being really loud on Friday night of being like, well, I'm very uncomfortable here and now I can't enjoy this fun. But I think the other part of it is being okay with that for a moment, right? Like, hey, you might be trying to do something fun and that might be a little bit, and when I say fun, whatever Venus and Taurus is for you, and that might kind of scare you a little bit, but that feeling, doesn't last forever. I think Friday is an interesting day because there's a lot of good things going on. And then by the nightfall, there's like this kind of like edgy, that was annoying. I'm going to be bad and I'm going to be bad now. And then we get to Saturday morning. The only transit we have going on Saturday is the moon making a square to Pluto. And then throughout the rest of the day, it'll be separated from Pluto. And I think there's kind of this, the thing I wrote down was like fear spiraling. Pluto makes these tiny things big and these big things really small. So there's, big things in society that are a big deal and people minimize. And then there's these things that aren't a big deal that people, make into these big deals. And the thing is, the moon's in Scorpio squaring Pluto, there's a level of like, okay, what are you being fixated on? Emotionally speaking, right? Like, I feel like so many people, it's funny online how many people are always overthinking their interactions with other people. Like, oh my God, did I overshare? Oh my God, something I find really interesting is when people freak out over, like, when someone is trying to share a story and then you share your story to be able to relate to them, and people are like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. It's like, that's how human beings relate to one another. Why is everyone freaking out about social dynamics? Like, you know what I mean? Don't do your best to not be like rude or whatever, but like, you're also a human being. Like, you can relate when you can share that you've been through the same thing. You can then therefore relate on a deeper level. I don't know why people overthink that. But anyway, there's a little bit of Saturday that's just overthinking, again, I wrote down fear spiraling. And then the rest of Saturday is just the moon being in Scorpio. So being a little bit emo throughout Saturday. But then we get to Sunday, and this is the big day, because this is when Mercury conjoins Jupiter, and then Mercury immediately moves into Cancer. And then by the end of the day, the moon in Scorpio squares Mars and Leo. There's a lot to talk about here. Number one, this is a huge, huge news day. If you are on my, if you're a member on the Use Astrology tier or the Learn Astrology tier, because you get the Use stuff too, I talked about this in the June rising sign horoscopes, especially for the mutable rising signs. So what, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces, these are like your two angular rulers coming together, and Jupiter's been in detriment, right? But Mercury's in its home sign of Gemini where Jupiter is, and Mercury comes through to Jupiter. And there's a level of like, on one level, it's huge news, right? Like, so someone telling you something, information being delivered to you, that's a really big deal. Information in the world that's being delivered, that's a really big deal. But another way of looking at it is solving this Jupiter and Gemini issue. What has Jupiter and Gemini been, and what needs to be clarified? What needs to be corrected? Because that's what this is about. Mercury then immediately moves into Cancer, where now we're on to something completely different. And now we're getting ready for, and something I talked about in the rising sign horoscopes too was, I wonder how much this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction actually gives us the foundation of what Jupiter and Cancer is about, meaning some sort of information that's like, hey, in 1 week from now, this will happen. Something along those lines. Mercury going into Cancer is a vibe shift with what we're kind of focused on. And again, we're kind of going from, the Mercury in Aries retrograde, and Mercury flew through Taurus, and then there was a bunch of clarity in Gemini, where now it's just kind of in Cancer for the next little while. It goes a little bit slower in Cancer, but our mind is going to be much more fixated and focused on what do we want to begin and initiate that has to deal with protecting, nurturing, and defending whatever Cancer rules in your chart. And it will square Saturn, it will square Neptune, which we'll talk about here in a second. But there's some sort of information. It's kind of like, for example, Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is like, all my grandparents are dead, but if you ever had like a grandparent or a family member coming over and they're like, hey, I'm coming over in like an hour. And you're like, oh shit, let me clean up my house. Let me take care of things first for this to happen. That's the vibe on Sunday. So then also on Sunday, we have Mercury making, the moon in Scorpio making a square to Mars and Leo. I wrote down the battle of the egos. Mars and Leo, is just very ferocious, and the moon in Scorpio is like digging in at, all the little tiny things. And there's just this, the moon is ruled by Mars and Mars is squaring it. So it's just kind of like the difference between, wanting to be hidden and wanting to be seen, and that conflict just being very loud in whatever part of your chart it rules. And so there's a lot of just frustration too at the same time. And so Sunday's a weird day. Like there's like this weird emotional frustration, but then at the same time, there's like a huge announcement and huge news that then brings us into next week. And check out this list of next week, guys. Mercury's going to make a square to Saturn. Then Mercury will make a square to Neptune. Then Jupiter moves into Cancer. You can't ask for anything better. We have the full moon in Sagittarius, which again, I talked about this in the rising sign horoscopes. I really think the full moon in Sagittarius next week is, in my opinion, the best day of the year, if not one of the best days. And it's definitely the best lunation of the year. And it's the full moon, right? It's in a Jupiter ruled sign. So it's ruled over by Jupiter. Jupiter's in Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, and the moon's in Sag, which is ruled by Jupiter. So there's this weird relationship. The moon, highlights the night and the dark. And so it's bringing awareness to what Jupiter is. Jupiter just moved into Cancer. The full moon is just really like, I just think something significant changes. Something like that is like the end of you have reached the end of the tunnel. The light is pouring on you and you're out of the darkness now. So we have that. Plus Mercury will make a sextile to Venus. Then we have Jupiter making a square to Saturn. And this is the third and final Jupiter-Saturn square that started, during 2020 with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. We had two other squares in 2024. This is the third and final one. This is more symbolic of a chapter finally shifting, a page finally turning in your life. And then it comes with the Mars-Uranus square next week. As we end next week, we have a Mars-Uranus square, which is major disruption, major upheaval before Mars moves into Virgo. Huge week next week. But to just wrap up this week, a lot of this week is, for one, the 90-day people. We're getting locked in. You're going to deal with some challenges, but it's really the end of the week where you're going to start seeing some results. I think Friday is a really good day. You're going to have some weird feelings by Friday night. Saturday's weird, but then Sunday, there's just things that are happening that are either within your control or outside of your control that are going to be a big deal. And so with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below. Let me know what's going on for you. Let me know if you're enjoying the 90-day program thus far. And with that being said, I'll be seeing you guys next week.